The market square of Wellingford had never known such silence, where moments before had been the cheerful cacophony of morning commerce, the haggling of fishmongers, the cries of flower girls, the clatter of carriage wheels upon cobblestone. Now stood a tableau of frozen horror. Lady Evelyn Morwenna Ashcroft remained motionless at its centre, her slim fingers still clutching the small purse that had spilled its meagre contents upon the ground. 3 shillings and 6pence, all that remained of her family's fortune, glinted mockingly in the April sunlight. "I fear, my lady," spoke the butcher, his voice loud enough to reach the farthest corners of the square, "that your father's credit no longer extends to this establishment, nor, I suspect, to any in Wellingford." The crimson tide that flooded Evelyn's cheeks matched perfectly the ribbons adorning her modest bonnet. "There must be some mistake," she whispered, though she knew with dreadful certainty that there was none. For 3 months she had managed the faltering accounts of Ashcroft Manor, watching as their fortunes dwindled from precarious to ruinous. Still, she had never imagined her humiliation would be made so public, so complete. "No mistake, Lady Ashcroft," the voice came from behind her, sleek as silk but cold as winter's first frost. "Your father's debts are most extensively documented." She turned to face Sir Halric Dunwyn, her father's former solicitor, now agent to the Duke of Winthorpe. His thin-lipped smile conveyed not an ounce of sympathy. "Perhaps," he continued, producing a leather-bound ledger from his coat, "you would care to review the particulars. I have them here in painful detail. Your father's signature acknowledges each sum." In the hushed circle that had formed around them, not a soul dared speak. Evelyn's fingers travelled instinctively to the silver feather pendant at her throat. Her mother's final gift before consumption claimed her 5 winters past. "I shall settle these accounts," she said, her voice steadier than her heart. "If you would but grant us time." "Time, my lady, is the one luxury House Ashcroft can no longer afford." Sir Halric's voice dropped to a confidential murmur that nonetheless carried to every straining ear. "Though perhaps there remains one asset your father has yet to leverage." A nearby flower girl, no more than 12, edged closer to Evelyn and pressed a single white violet into her gloved palm. The small gesture of kindness nearly undid her composure. "The Duke of Winthorpe has expressed interest in your situation." Sir Halric's eyes moved deliberately over Evelyn's form, lingering on the gentle rise and fall of her chest. "He will be at Thornridge Hall this evening. Your presence is requested, not required, of course, but advisable." "The ruthless Duke?" someone whispered from the crowd, and a visible shudder passed through the onlookers. Sir Halric's smile widened. "His Grace has generously offered to discuss terms that might prove mutually beneficial to all concerned parties." The white violet trembled between Evelyn's fingers. Everyone knew of Duke Calum Dravenhart, whose very name sent tenants fleeing and whose calculating mind had doubled his already vast holdings in less than a decade. Rumours abounded of rivals mysteriously ruined, of ladies who had caught his eye only to vanish from society entirely. The ruthless Duke, they called him, the man who had never been denied, never been defeated, and never, it was said, shown mercy. "I shall inform His Grace of your attendance," Sir Halric said, interpreting her silence as acquiescence. Evelyn raised her chin, meeting his gaze with unexpected steadiness. "You may tell the Duke I shall consider his invitation." Sir Halric's eyes narrowed. "Consider carefully, Lady Ashcroft. Your father is presently enjoying the hospitality of His Grace's private cells for debtors. Quite comfortable, I am assured, but cells nonetheless." The flower girl tugged gently at Evelyn's sleeve. "They say the Duke has no heart, milady," she whispered. "They say he keeps it locked in a box of ice." "Nonsense, child," Sir Halric scoffed, though his eyes remained cold. "His Grace has no need of a heart. He has power instead." As the crowd finally dispersed, Evelyn clutched her mother's pendant. The white violet had left a smudge of pollen upon her glove, a tiny stain of innocence upon the day's growing darkness. She gazed toward the distant hills where Thornridge Hall stood in ominous silhouette against the sky. "Milady?" The flower girl looked up at her with worried eyes. Evelyn managed a smile, brittle as newly formed ice. "Do not fret, dear one. Hearts of ice can melt, can they not?" But as she gathered her fallen coins and empty basket, the cathedral bells tolled 3, each sonorous peal sounding to her ears like the striking of an executioner's clock. In fewer than 5 hours, she would face the ruthless Duke and with him her family's fate. In the distance, a carriage waited. Its door bore a raven crest sealed in silver. Thornridge Hall loomed in the deepening dusk like a behemoth carved of shadow and stone. Its Gothic spires pierced the twilight sky as if to pin the heavens in place, while ivy-strangled walls suggested centuries of secrets too dark for daylight's scrutiny. The carriage bearing Lady Evelyn Morwenna Ashcroft passed beneath an ancient stone archway. its entrance guarded by twin gargoyles, whose snarling visages offered silent warning to all who entered uninvited. "Remember your place," Miss Alara Graythorne whispered, adjusting the pale blue ribbons in Evelyn's silver-blonde hair one final time. As her closest friend and lady's companion, Alara had insisted upon accompanying her to this ill-fated meeting. "Speak only when addressed. Keep your gaze lowered, and for heaven's sake do not contradict him." "I shall scarcely have the opportunity," Evelyn replied, her fingers absently tracing the silver feather at her throat. "Men like the Duke do not converse with their prey, they merely pronounce sentence." The carriage wheels crunched to a halt upon the gravel drive. Immediately, footmen in impeccable black livery materialized alongside, each bearing the silver raven insignia of House Dravenhart. The door swung open, and Evelyn found herself escorted into the grand entrance hall of the most feared nobleman in 3 counties. Inside, Thornridge revealed itself as a study in controlled opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, polished to mirror-like perfection. Ancient tapestries depicting conquests, both martial and mythological, adorned walls, paneled in dark oak. The air carried the scent of beeswax, leather-bound books, and something sharper, perhaps power itself. "Lady Ashcroft," announced a silver-haired butler whose dignified bearing suggested decades of service. "And Miss Graythorne." Evelyn managed a curtsy, her practiced grace betrayed only by the slightest trembling of her gloved hands. When she straightened, her gaze fell not upon the Duke, but upon a portrait dominating the far wall. It depicted a man of perhaps 30 years, dark-haired and severe, his azure eyes seeming to follow her with calculating interest. The artist had captured an expression of such cold assessment that Evelyn felt her breath catch. "You admire my likeness?" The voice came from behind her, deep, measured, and entirely devoid of warmth. Evelyn turned slowly to face its owner, her heart performing a curious leap within her chest. Duke Calum Dravenhart stood framed in a doorway, his tall figure silhouetted against the firelight from the adjoining room. Unlike the portrait, which showed him in full ceremonial regalia, he wore a simple black coat of impeccable tailoring, a silver waistcoat, and trousers that emphasized his considerable height. His raven hair, touched with premature silver at the temples, was swept back from a forehead unmarred by expression. "Forgive me, Your Grace," Evelyn murmured, dropping into another curtsy. "I meant no impertinence. And yet you have not answered my question." He approached with unhurried steps, each footfall deliberate as a chess move. "Do you admire the painting?" She swallowed, sensing the trap in his seemingly innocuous inquiry. "The artist has great skill." "That is not what I asked." He circled her slowly, his gaze a physical sensation upon her skin. "I asked if you admired the likeness, the subject, not the execution." Miss Graythorne shifted uncomfortably beside her, but Evelyn found an unexpected well of courage. "I could not say, Your Grace, having only just made your acquaintance, though the portrait suggests a man of formidable resolve." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps or amusement, crossed his features, swift as lightning and just as quickly gone. "An elegant evasion, Lady Ashcroft. Come." He gestured toward the room from which he had emerged. "We have matters to discuss that require privacy." Miss Graythorne stepped forward, but a single glacial glance from the Duke froze her in place. "Your companion will wait here," he stated, the words broking no argument. "This conversation concerns only the two of us, and your father's future." Evelyn felt color drain from her face. "My father, is currently enjoying my hospitality," the Duke finished smoothly. "His comfort depends entirely on the outcome of our discussion." The library into which he led her burned with the golden light of 100 candles reflected in polished mahogany bookshelves that soared to a vaulted ceiling. A massive desk dominated the center, its surface bare, save for a single document laid with precise care upon leather blotting paper. "Your father owes me a considerable sum," the Duke began without preamble, moving to stand behind the desk. His fingers, long and elegant, rested lightly upon the document. "A sum he cannot hope to repay in his lifetime, nor in the lifetime of his heirs should any survive him." Evelyn's throat constricted. Surely there must be some arrangement. Indeed, his voice cut through her plea like a blade through silk. "I propose a most practical arrangement." He extended the document toward her. "Your signature upon this marriage contract will satisfy all debts." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Marriage," she echoed faintly. "You seem surprised." His mouth curved in what might have been a smile on any other face, but on his remained merely a shifting of features. "Surely Sir Halric made my intentions clear in the market square. He spoke only of terms, of discussion." Evelyn's fingers trembled as she accepted the contract. "Not of marriage to..." To the most ruthless duke in England? He completed her sentence with cool precision. Is that not how I'm known in your village whispers, Lady Ashcroft? The monster who devours fortunes and souls with equal appetite. Before she could respond, a servant entered bearing a silver tray with a decanter of amber liquid and 2 crystal glasses. The Duke dismissed him with a gesture, then poured a measure for himself and, unexpectedly, for her. Courage, Lady Ashcroft, he murmured, extending the glass. I find it is sometimes required when signing one's life away. Their fingers brushed as she accepted the offering. Though his touch was brief, she noted with surprise that his hand was warm. Why me? The question escaped her lips before propriety could contain it. Surely your grace could secure a more advantageous match, a lady of greater fortune or connection. The Duke regarded her over the rim of his glass, his eyes reflecting candlelight like twin sapphires. Perhaps I tire of advantage. Perhaps I find integrity more compelling than fortune. He set down his untouched drink. Or perhaps I simply wish to possess the one thing in Wellingford that remains untarnished. The clock upon the mantel struck 9. Each chime seemed to seal her fate more irrevocably than the last. The contract, Lady Ashcroft. Your decision. Evelyn's gaze fell to the elegant copperplate script that would transform her into the Duchess of Winthorpe, or condemn her father to imprisonment and her family to ruin. She reached for the quill. The Duke's hand covered hers, unexpected and startling in its gentleness. Once signed, he said softly, there shall be no escape. Are you certain? In that moment of hesitation, a shadow crossed the library window. A raven, its wings spread against the glass like an omen, and Evelyn made her choice. The quill scratched across parchment. The deed was done. The chapel of St. Bartholomew the Silent stood like a reproach against the morning sky, its weathered stone facade bearing witness to 8 centuries of prayers, promises, and penitence. Watery April sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting pools of sapphire and ruby upon the worn flagstones where Lady Evelyn Morwenna Ashcroft would cease to be merely lady and become duchess. You look beautiful, whispered Alara, adjusting the delicate lace veil that cascaded from Evelyn's silver-blonde hair. The wedding gown, delivered mysteriously to Ashcroft Manor at dawn, was a marvel of ivory silk and seed pearls, so exquisitely fitted one might believe the seamstresses had measured her in her sleep. Though I confess, you seem more lamb to slaughter than bride to altar. Perhaps I am both, Evelyn murmured, her fingers instinctively seeking the silver feather pendant hidden beneath her bodice. The Duke had provided everything for this day, save a smile or word of affection. In the week since their fateful meeting, she had seen him but once, a glimpse across the village square, his tall figure commanding instant deference from those who scurried from his path. The chapel doors groaned open. Evelyn's father, newly released from the Duke's private prison and looking ashen but determined, extended his arm. I would have spared you this, Lord Berengar Ashcroft said, his once proud voice now a rasp. Had there been any other way, there was not, she answered simply. Come, father, let us not keep the Duke waiting. I have heard he despises tardiness almost as much as weakness. The nave stretched before them like a gauntlet to be run. On the right sat the few remaining friends of House Ashcroft. On the left, the Duke's associates, pale, impeccable men whose calculating gazes assessed Evelyn as they might a prized mare at auction. At the altar waited a stooped cleric with rheumy eyes and trembling hands, Father Corvin Elmere, rumoured to be the Duke's childhood tutor and one of the few who could speak to him without fear. And beside the priest stood Duke Calum Dravenhart himself, resplendent in formal black, a single silver raven pinned to his lapel. His face remained impassive as marble, betraying neither pleasure nor impatience as Evelyn progressed toward her future. The ceremony passed in a haze of ancient vows and solemn declarations. Evelyn spoke when prompted, her voice clear if colourless. The Duke's responses came measured and precise, resonating through the chapel with the finality of sealing wax upon parchment. With this ring I thee wed, he intoned, sliding a band of platinum and sapphires upon her finger. The metal felt cold against her skin, a physical manifestation of the bond now forged between them. Only once did something unexpected occur. As Father Corvin pronounced them husband and wife, the Duke's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around hers, and for the briefest moment, Evelyn thought she detected a flicker of something in his glacial gaze. Not warmth, precisely, but perhaps the merest acknowledgement of her existence as more than ornament or possession. The moment shattered as they turned to face the assembled witnesses. A woman stood at the chapel's entrance, tall and regal, with hair the colour of burnished copper and a gown of emerald silk that accentuated every generous curve. Her beauty was undeniable, her expression venomous. "Lady Seraphine Valehaven," Alara breathed from behind. The Duke's former... A sharp glance from Calum silenced her instantly. The procession down the aisle felt interminable. When they passed Lady Seraphine, the woman dropped into an exaggerated curtsy, her verdant skirts pooling around her like poisoned water. "Your Grace," she purred, addressing the Duke while her gaze flayed Evelyn. "How magnificent you look today. And your bride?" Her pause carried the weight of unspoken insult. "How unexpected a choice." "Lady Valehaven," the Duke acknowledged, with the barest inclination of his head. "I had not recalled including you among the invitations." "Did you not?" Her laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Perhaps it was oversight, or perhaps you knew I would never miss witnessing the taming of the ruthless Duke." Her painted lips curved. "Though I confess I expected more substance in the woman who accomplished what so many could not." Before Evelyn could respond, the Duke's hand settled at the small of her back, proprietary yet strangely protective. "My wife," he said, emphasizing the word with lethal softness, "requires no defense against idle speculation. Good day, Lady Valehaven." Outside, a gleaming black carriage awaited to convey them to Thornridge Hall. As the Duke handed Evelyn inside, his expression remained unreadable. "You conducted yourself well," he said once they were underway, his first direct address since their vows. "Lady Valehaven intended provocation. She succeeded admirably," Evelyn replied, surprising herself with her candor. A ghost of something, not quite a smile but a softening, touched his mouth. "You will encounter worse than Seraphine Valehaven as my Duchess. There are many who would see us fail, each for their own reasons." "Us?" The word felt foreign. "I was unaware we constituted an us, Your Grace." The carriage jolted over a rut, briefly throwing them together. His arm instinctively steadied her, then withdrew with deliberate slowness. "We are bound now," he said simply. "For better or worse, your fortunes are tied to mine. And my father's debts. Forgiven, as promised. The necessary documents await my signature at Thornridge." Relief washed through her like summer rain. "Then I thank you, Your Grace." "Calum," the correction came quietly. "In private, at least, you might use my given name." The intimacy of the request, for request it was despite his commanding nature, startled her more than any grand pronouncement might have done. "Then I thank you, Calum." His name felt strange upon her tongue, like a spell half-remembered. They travelled in silence thereafter, the countryside rolling past in watercolour shades of spring. Only as Thornridge Hall appeared on the horizon did the Duke speak again. "I have had the east wing prepared for your use," he said, his gaze fixed on the approaching estate. "You will find it comfortable, I trust, and sufficiently distant from my own quarters to ensure your privacy. You are considerate, Your Grace." Calum. His laugh, the first she had heard from him, held no mirth. "Considerate? No one has accused me of that particular vice before." He turned to face her fully. "I am not a gentle man, Evelyn, nor am I a particularly good one. But I am not the monster of village whispers either. Remember that, when you hear the inevitable rumors of my cruelty." The carriage passed beneath Thornridge's stone archway. As it slowed, he added, almost inaudibly, "And when midnight comes, lock your chamber door." Before she could question this cryptic warning, footmen appeared to assist their descent. The Duke emerged first, then extended his hand to help her down. As she took it, the manor's massive entrance door swung open to reveal a tall, austere woman in severe black silk, her silver-streaked hair pulled into an unforgiving knot. "Duchess Maedra," the Duke said by way of introduction, "my father's sister. She has overseen Thornridge these many years." The woman's penetrating gaze assessed Evelyn with unconcealed disapproval. "So this is the village girl who has ensnared England's most eligible duke. How quaint." Evelyn felt rather than saw Calum stiffen beside her. "My wife," he said, the words clipped with warning, "is now mistress of Thornridge. You will accord her the respect her position demands." Duchess Maedra's smile did not reach her eyes. "Of course, nephew. I live only to serve the house of Dravenhart." She gestured toward the entrance. "Your wedding feast awaits, such as it is, with so little time to prepare." As they crossed the threshold into the grand hall, now bedecked with spring flowers and silver candelabra, Evelyn felt the weight of countless eyes upon her. Servants, retainers, distant relatives, all watching, weighing, wondering how long the village mouse would survive in the hawk's nest. Yet when the Duke's hand settled briefly, almost reassuringly, at her waist, Evelyn found herself standing taller. Whatever game of power and possession she had entered, she would play it with the dignity befitting her new title. In the gallery above, a clock chimed 3, 9 hours until midnight. 9 hours until she discovered whether the Duke's warning sprang from concern or threat. And in the corner of the hall, watching with undisguised malice, stood Lady Seraphine Valehaven, her emerald gown a splash of poison amid the muted colours of the gathering. In her gloved hand, she clutched a sealed letter bearing a crest Evelyn did not recognise. The east wing of Thornridge Hall unfolded before Evelyn like a labyrinthine dream. Corridors hung with tapestries depicting ancient hunts, chambers furnished in subdued opulence, windows that framed the twilight gardens where marble nymphs stood sentinel among box hedges. She moved through these rooms with the cautious wonder of a sparrow that finds itself caged in gold rather than iron. "Your personal chambers, Your Grace," announced Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper, as she opened a final set of double doors. Unlike the masculine severity that characterized the rest of Thornridge, this suite bloomed in shades of pale blue and silver. A massive four-poster bed draped in gossamer curtains dominated the sleeping chamber, while the adjoining sitting room featured delicate furnishings that might have graced a French palace. "His Grace selected everything himself," Mrs. Holloway added, her tone suggesting she found this fact remarkable. "The Duke has never before concerned himself with such domestic matters." Evelyn ran her fingers over the silver embroidery adorning a silk cushion. "It is most thoughtful," she murmured, though thoughtful seemed an inadequate descriptor for such meticulous attention to her comfort. "The Duke instructed that you might wish to rest before dinner." Mrs. Holloway gestured toward a discreet bell pull. "Ring when you require your lady's maid. Miss Graythorne has been assigned chambers through that connecting door." Left alone, Evelyn sank onto the window seat overlooking the eastern gardens. The afternoon shadows lengthened across perfect gravel paths as she contemplated her bewildering circumstances. In the span of a fortnight, she had tumbled from genteel poverty to the pinnacle of aristocratic privilege, yet both positions felt equally precarious. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Clara entered, her familiar face a welcome anchor in this sea of strangeness. "So this is what becomes of girls who marry monsters," she quipped, settling beside Evelyn on the window seat. "Sapphire, silk and silver candlesticks." "He is not," Evelyn began, then caught herself. "The Duke is many things, but I begin to doubt the village tales of his cruelty." Alara's eyebrow arched skeptically. "The same Duke who imprisoned your father? Who forced your hand in marriage? Who ruins men for sport and breaks women's hearts as casually as others break bread? I wonder how many of those tales originated with Lady Valehaven," Evelyn mused. "She seemed most eager to witness my discomfort this morning." With good reason. It's widely known she expected to become Duchess herself after warming the Duke's bed these 3 years past. Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Do you speak too freely, Alara? Someone must. You'll hear worse at dinner, though not spoken to your face." Alara squeezed her hand. "Be wary of her, Evie. Women scorned are dangerous enough. Women of Seraphine Valehaven's ambition and resources are positively venomous." As if conjured by her warning, a maid appeared bearing a silver salver, upon which rested a folded note sealed with pale green wax. "From Lady Valehaven, Your Grace," the girl murmured, bobbing a curtsy. Evelyn broke the seal, her heart quickening as she read the elegant script. "Your husband's secrets would curdle your innocent blood, little Duchess. Shall I enlighten you before he claims his husbandly rights? The library, 10:30. Come alone if you wish to learn what manner of beast you have wed." Alara read the note over her shoulder, her expression darkening. "You cannot go." "Can I afford not to?" Evelyn countered softly. "Whatever Lady Valehaven wishes to reveal, I would rather face it directly than remain in ignorance. It is a trap, Evie, likely designed to compromise you on your wedding night. Then I shall be vigilant." She folded the note carefully. "But I will not begin my marriage by hiding from unpleasant truths." Dinner proved an exquisite torment. Seated at the opposite end of a table that could accommodate 30, Evelyn found herself separated from the Duke by an expanse of damask and silver that might as well have been an ocean. He conducted quiet conversation with Viscount Audran Leclerc, a fox-faced man whose cold eyes repeatedly assessed Evelyn as though calculating her value, while Duchess Maidra dominated the discourse at Evelyn's end with thinly veiled criticisms of her background. Of course, one cannot expect a country upbringing to include the finer points of precedence and protocol, the older woman remarked, as Evelyn hesitated over the bewildering array of cutlery. "We shall endeavour to polish you, my dear, though diamonds typically respond better to such efforts than lesser stones." Lady Valehaven, seated strategically between the Duke and his aunt, laughed melodiously. "Perhaps our new Duchess might enlighten us with charming rustic tales from her village. I understand the common folk have such quaint traditions." "Indeed they do," Evelyn replied evenly. My favorite involves identifying poisonous creatures by their vibrant coloration. Nature wisely marks its most dangerous creations with the brightest hues to warn the unwary. She smiled directly at Lady Valehaven's emerald gown, and for an instant, silence descended upon the table. Then, remarkably, the Duke's deep laugh broke the tension. "Well answered, Duchess," he said, raising his glass in her direction. "It seems my wife possesses both wisdom and wit." Duchess Maidra's mouth pinched like a drawstring purse. "Wit in a woman is often mistaken for impertinence, nephew. Not by men of discernment, aunt." The Duke's gaze remained on Evelyn, his expression unreadable but somehow approving. As the endless dinner progressed through 9 elaborate courses, Evelyn found herself repeatedly catching the Duke's eye across the table. Each time, he acknowledged her with the slightest inclination of his head, as though they shared some private understanding. It was, she reflected, more communication than they had exchanged throughout their entire courtship. At precisely 10:30, she excused herself, citing fatigue from the day's events. The Duke rose as protocol demanded, but made no move to accompany her. Instead, he merely stated, "Remember my warning, Duchess." The corridors of Thornridge twisted like a labyrinth in the flickering candlelight. Guided by a silent footman, Evelyn found herself not at her chambers but approaching the library where, just 7 days prior, she had signed away her freedom. "I requested my chambers," she said, confusion evident in her tone. The footman bowed. "His Grace instructed that you wish to visit the library first, Your Grace. He awaits you within." Her pulse quickened. How had Calum known of Lady Valehaven's invitation, and what did his interception portend? The library doors swung open to reveal not the Duke, but Lady Seraphine Valehaven, reclining upon a chaise longue with predatory elegance. Behind her stood Sir Halric Dunwyn, the Duke's administrator, his thin face alight with unpleasant anticipation. "Our little Duchess arrives," Seraphine purred, rising like a cat disturbed from its rest. "How dutiful, how obedient." Evelyn remained in the doorway, one hand still upon the handle. "I see the Duke is not present. I shall rejoin him in the dining room." "Oh, but you misunderstand," Seraphine advanced, her smile sharp as a stiletto. "We have prepared such an illuminating presentation on your husband's true nature. Sir Halric has been most thorough in his documentation." Sir Halric stepped forward, proffering a leather portfolio. Financial records, personal correspondence, testimonies from intimate acquaintances, all painting a most comprehensive portrait of the Duke of Winthorpe. "A portrait you would do well to study before he claims his conjugal rights," Seraphine added silkily, "though perhaps I could offer more practical insights into the Duke's preferences. He can be most demanding in his appetites." Evelyn's fingers tightened on the door handle. "Whatever insights you offer, Lady Valehaven, they grow stale with time. The Duke's past concerns me less than our future." Seraphine's laugh held no mirth. "Such charming naivete. Do you truly believe he married you for anything but your youth and malleability, a virgin bride to mold to his perversions after tiring of more sophisticated pleasures?" "I believe," came a voice from the shadows behind them, "that you trespass upon my patience, Seraphine." The Duke stepped into the candlelight, his expression glacial with controlled fury. Sir Halric blanched, the portfolio trembling in his grasp. "Your Grace," he stammered, "we were merely attempting to poison my wife's mind on our wedding night." The Duke's voice remained preternaturally calm. "An interesting strategy. Ineffective, but interesting." Seraphine recovered first, her chin lifting defiantly. "She deserves to know the truth about the monster she has wed." "Indeed." The Duke moved to Evelyn's side, his hand settling possessively at her waist. "And she shall learn it, from me alone. Now I suggest you depart my home before I forget the courtesies due your station." "You cannot silence the truth forever, Calum," Seraphine hissed as she swept toward the door. "Your precious Duchess will discover your true nature soon enough." When they had gone, an oppressive silence filled the library. The Duke's hand dropped from Evelyn's waist as he moved to pour himself a measure of brandy. "You received her note," he stated rather than asked. "Yes. How did you—" "There are few secrets at Thornridge." He downed the liquor in a single swallow. "Though evidently more than I realized, if Halric conspires with Seraphine beneath my roof." Evelyn studied her husband's profile, sharp as a blade against the firelight. "Why did you intercept me?" His gaze, when it met hers, held an unexpected weariness. "Because Lady Valehaven deals in half-truths wrapped in venom, and Sir Halric's loyalty extends only to whoever offers the highest price." He set down his empty glass. "And because no bride should face such ugliness on her wedding night." "And what of your warning? To lock my door at midnight?" A muscle tightened in his jaw. "That stands unchanged." Before she could question him further, the library door opened once more. This time Father Corvin entered, his stooped frame seeming to bear a weight beyond his years. "Your Grace," he addressed the Duke, then turned to Evelyn with unexpected warmth. "My Lady Duchess, I came to offer a blessing on your union, if you would permit an old man's presumption." The Duke's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Your presumptions are always welcome, Father." As the elderly priest raised his hands in benediction, Evelyn was startled to see the Duke bow his head with what appeared to be genuine reverence. It was the first crack she had observed in his formidable facade. "May your union be blessed with understanding beyond words," Father Corvin intoned, his rheumy eyes moving between them. "And may you find in one another not what the world expects, but what your souls require." The clock upon the mantel struck 11. 1 hour until midnight. 1 hour until whatever truth lay behind the Duke's warning would reveal itself. Father Corvin pressed something into Evelyn's palm, a small volume bound in worn leather. "Poetry," he whispered. "For when the night grows darkest." The Duke's sharp intake of breath was nearly inaudible, but Evelyn caught it nonetheless. "It grows late," Caleb said abruptly. "I shall escort the Duchess to her chambers." As they navigated the shadowed corridors, the small book seemed to burn against Evelyn's skin like an ember of mysterious possibility, and when they reached her door, the Duke's fingers brushed hers with deliberate gentleness. "Remember," he murmured, "lock your door." Then he was gone, a dark silhouette retreating down the corridor as the distant clock began to toll the quarter hour. Midnight arrived at Thornridge Hall draped in silver moonlight and whispered secrets. Evelyn sat before the hearth in her chambers, the fire reduced to glowing embers that cast more shadows than illumination. She had dismissed Alara an hour past, preferring solitude as she contemplated the curious volume Father Corvin had pressed into her hands. "Poetry," he had called it, a simple description for what proved an extraordinary discovery. The slim book contained no printed verses, but rather page after page of handwritten lines in an elegant, masculine script. Poems of startling beauty and unexpected vulnerability, speaking of isolation behind walls of privilege, of loneliness amid power, of a soul encased in ice yet burning with unspoken desires. No author claimed these works. No name adorned the leather cover. Yet as she read verse after verse, Evelyn felt an inexplicable certainty growing within her. These words, raw, restrained, yet pulsing with buried passion, could belong to only one man. The clock struck 12, each sonorous toll reverberating through the sleeping house. Evelyn recalled the Duke's warning with sudden clarity. "Lock your door." She rose, the poetry book clutched to her breast, and moved toward the heavy oak panel that separated her from the corridor beyond. Her fingers had just touched the key when a soft scratch came from the connecting door that linked her chambers to Alara's. Frowning, she crossed the room. "Alara," she called softly, "I thought you were bed." No response came, yet the scratching continued, faint but persistent. Cautiously, Evelyn opened the door a fraction. A small grey cat slipped into her chambers, its luminous eyes regarding her with imperial disdain, before it leapt gracefully onto her bed and commenced grooming its silvery fur. "Well then," Evelyn murmured, amused despite her apprehension. "It seems I have company for my vigil after all." She returned to the fireplace, stoking the embers to coax forth new flames. As the fire rekindled, she became aware of another sound, not from Alara's chambers, but from the corridor outside. Footsteps, measured and deliberate, approaching her door. Her heart quickened. The Duke, coming to claim his husbandly rights despite his cryptic warning, or perhaps Lady Valehaven, intent on further mischief. The footsteps paused outside her door. Evelyn held her breath, the poetry book clutched like a talisman. 1 second stretched into 10, then 30. A full minute passed in suspended silence. Then from beneath her door appeared a folded parchment, pushed slowly into her chamber by unseen fingers. The footsteps receded down the corridor. Only when their echo had completely faded did Evelyn move to retrieve the mysterious missive. It bore no seal, no address, merely a single word written in the same elegant hand as the poetry book. "Duchess." With trembling fingers, she unfolded the parchment. "The garden beneath your window harbors nightingales that sing only in darkest hours. Their song is for those who listen beyond what others hear. Should you wish it, follow their melody to the glass pavilion, where moonlight reveals what daylight conceals. Lock your door behind you." Evelyn moved to the window, drawing aside the heavy velvet curtains. The east garden lay bathed in moonlight, its formal paths and hedges transformed into a silvered labyrinth. At its heart stood a structure she had not noticed during daylight, a glass pavilion that caught and fractured the moon's glow like a diamond set among lesser jewels. And from the garden's depths came the unmistakable song of a nightingale, impossibly beautiful in the midnight stillness. Curiosity is a perilous quality in a duke's wife, she told the grey cat, which had abandoned her bed to twine about her ankles. Yet I find myself unwilling to ignore such an invitation. Her decision made, Evelyn exchanged her dressing gown for a simple blue dress and warm cloak, the poetry book she tucked into her pocket, an inexplicable comfort against whatever awaited her in the garden pavilion, and as instructed, she locked her chamber door before slipping into the silent corridor. Thornridge after midnight revealed itself as a different kingdom entirely. Shadows pooled in corners where daylight never penetrated. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors seemed to follow her progress with painted eyes that held secrets centuries old. Twice she froze at sounds from distant wings, a door closing, a muffled voice, but encountered no one as she descended the servant's stair that led to a small side entrance. The night air embraced her with unexpected warmth for April, carrying the scent of newly bloomed flowers and damp earth. Following the nightingale's persistent song, Evelyn navigated the garden paths, her slippered feet silent upon the gravel. Moonlight transformed her silver-blonde hair into a luminous crown, and in another context, another life, she might have imagined herself a fairy queen traversing her midnight realm. The glass pavilion materialized before her, its crystalline structure seemingly suspended between earth and sky. As she approached, Evelyn discerned a solitary figure within, tall, motionless, gazing out across the moonlit garden with hands clasped behind his back. Duke Calum Dravenheart turned at her approach, his severe features softened by the gentle illumination. Gone was the formal attire of dinner. He wore instead a simple white shirt open at the throat, dark trousers, and no coat, despite the night air's lingering chill. For the first time, Evelyn saw him not as the fearsome Duke of Legend, but as merely a man, albeit one of uncommon presence. "You came," he said, his deep voice pitched low, as though the night itself might eavesdrop on their exchange. "Your invitation was compelling." She remained at the pavilion's entrance, uncertain of protocol in this clandestine meeting, though I confess confusion. Why direct me to lock my door, only to summon me from behind it? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The locked door was protection against others, not myself. Thornridge harbors certain traditions regarding ducal wedding nights. He gestured for her to enter the pavilion. Traditions I chose to spare you. Evelyn stepped into the glass structure, immediately enveloped by the concentrated fragrance of night-blooming flowers that filled ornate planters along its perimeter. What traditions? Crude observation, confirmation of consummation. Customs born in darker centuries when dynastic certainty outweighed human dignity. His jaw tightened momentarily. My father embraced such practices. I do not. Yet, you summoned me here, past midnight, in secret. She studied his face, searching for intention in his guarded expression. "To what purpose, Your Grace?" "Calum," he corrected gently. "Here, especially, I would have you use my name." Their gazes held, and Evelyn felt something shift between them, a current of connection transcending their contractual bond. "Very well, Calum." She withdrew the small poetry volume from her pocket. "Perhaps you might explain this?" His reaction was immediate and visceral, a sharp intake of breath, a rigidity that transformed his posture from merely formal to genuinely alarmed. "Where did you obtain that?" "Father Corvin gave it to me. He said it was for when the night grows darkest." "And did you read it?" The question emerged rough-edged, almost vulnerable. "I did." She opened the book to a page she had marked, her finger tracing lines that had particularly moved her. "I stand encased in privilege and power, as insects trapped in amber, preserved but never free, to speak the silent language of the soul, that beats against its gilded cage." She looked up at him. "These are your words, are they not?" For a long moment the Duke remained utterly still, his expression unreadable in the shifting moonlight. Then, with deliberate care, he moved to a small table where a decanter and 2 glasses waited. "Father Corvin exceeds his authority," he said finally, pouring amber liquid that caught the moonlight like liquid topaz. "Those scribblings were never intended for other eyes." "They are beautiful," Evelyn said simply, full of feeling I would not have thought possible from the ruthless Duke. He offered her a glass, his own remaining untouched. "You begin to understand, perhaps, why such revelations are dangerous. Power tolerates no perception of weakness." "Is feeling weakness, then, in my world?" "Invariably." He turned away, gazing out into the garden where the nightingale had fallen silent. "I summoned you here to establish certain truths about our arrangement, Duchess. Not to have my private thoughts dissected." Evelyn felt the subtle withdrawal, the reconstruction of walls momentarily lowered. She sipped the offered drink, brandy, warming and smooth upon her tongue, and waited. "Our marriage," he continued, his back still to her, was contracted for specific purposes. Your father's debts are cleared. Your family's standing is restored through connection to mine. In return, I gain a duchess of impeccable lineage if modest fortune, whose reputation for virtue is beyond reproach. A business arrangement, she said softly. Precisely. He turned to face her once more. But it need not be an unpleasant one. I propose a marriage of mutual respect and independence. Your chambers remain your sanctuary. You will receive an allowance generous enough to satisfy any reasonable desire. You may redecorate Thornridge as you see fit, manage the household staff, host whatever entertainments please you, and in return, you will perform the public duties of my duchess with grace and dignity. You will present a united front against those who would undermine our position. You will accompany me to London for the season, where you will be introduced to society as my chosen companion. Evelyn studied the brandy in her glass, gathering courage for her next question. And private duties. His expression softened unexpectedly. I would not hurry such matters, Duchess. Trust between us must grow before intimacy can flourish. The glass pavilion suddenly seemed too warm, too close. Evelyn moved to its entrance, allowing the night breeze to cool her flushed cheeks. You speak of trust, yet Lady Valehaven claims— Seraphine Valehaven, he interrupted sharply, speaks from wounded pride and thwarted ambition. Whatever she implied about my past or proclivities, I suggest you evaluate against your direct experience of my character. I have known you barely a fortnight. How am I to judge your character on such slight acquaintance? The Duke moved to join her at the pavilion's threshold, close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of sandalwood that clung to his linen shirt. Judge me by my actions toward you, not rumors of my dealings with others. Judge me by whether I keep my word. His voice dropped lower. Judge me by whether I honor your boundaries, even when convention dictates otherwise. Moonlight silvered his features, softening the habitual severity of his expression. For an instant, Evelyn glimpsed the poet behind the Duke's forbidding facade, a man of depth and complexity, far beyond Wellingford's fearful whispers. I should return to my chambers, she said, suddenly aware of their isolation and the impropriety of their midnight meeting. The servants rise early. Questions would arise if I were discovered absent. Of course. He offered his arm with formal courtesy. I shall escort you to the servants' entrance. Beyond that, you must proceed alone to maintain our fiction. They walked in companionable silence through the moonlit garden, the nightingale resuming its liquid melody as they passed beneath a flowering cherry tree. At the small side door through which Evelyn had emerged, the Duke paused. One last matter, he said, his tone resuming its customary precision. Lady Valehaven and Sir Halric will depart Thornridge tomorrow. Their actions tonight revealed their true loyalties. Will they not spread rumors of our unconventional wedding night? A grim smile touched his lips. Let them. I care little for gossip, and you will soon learn that a duchess's dignity lies in rising above such petty concerns. He hesitated, then reached out to brush a fallen cherry blossom from her hair, his touch feather-light and startlingly intimate. Sleep well, Duchess. Lock your door. As Evelyn retraced her steps through the sleeping house, the poetry book pressed against her heart like a talisman, she reflected that the Duke of Winthorpe might indeed be ruthless in business and politics, but perhaps not in all matters. The man who wrote such verses, who respected her boundaries when tradition granted him every right to ignore them, who banished his own associates for attempting to undermine his wife, this was not the monster of Wellingford whispers. This was a man of contradictions and depths she had only begun to fathom. In her chambers, she found the grey cat curled upon her pillow, watching her return with feline indifference. As instructed, Evelyn locked her door, but as she drifted toward sleep, poetry verses echoing in her mind, she wondered whether the lock now served to keep dangers out, or to keep her increasingly complicated feelings contained within. On her bedside table, the moonlight illuminated a single cherry blossom that had fallen from her hair. Beside it, appearing as if by magic, lay a small silver key. The morning following her midnight garden encounter brought a Thornridge transformed. Evelyn descended to breakfast to find the great dining hall abuzz with activity. Footmen moving with purpose, maids polishing silver with uncommon vigor, and at the center of this controlled tempest, Duchess Maidra, issuing commands with imperious precision. "Ah, the bride emerges," the older woman observed, her voice pitched to carry. "I trust you found your chambers adequate for your rest." Evelyn detected the subtle emphasis, the implied question regarding her wedding night. "Most comfortable, thank you," she replied, accepting tea from a hovering footman, "though I admit curiosity about this morning's unusual activity. Preparation for tonight's assembly, of course." Duchess Maidra's eyebrows rose with practiced incredulity. Surely my nephew informed you. The neighbouring gentry gather to welcome the new Duchess of Winthorpe, a tradition dating back centuries. His Grace mentioned no such gathering, Evelyn said carefully, recalling the Duke's words about presenting a united front. But naturally I am delighted to meet our neighbours. A thin smile creased the older woman's features. Indeed, though I fear many may find themselves surprised by my nephew's choice of bride. One must wonder what compelling quality you possess to have secured such an advantageous match. The implication hung in the air like poisoned honey. Before Evelyn could formulate a response that maintained both dignity and harmony, a new voice entered the conversation. My wife's qualities are numerous and evident to those with discernment, Aunt. The Duke stood in the doorway, his formal attire suggesting he had already attended to estate business despite the early hour, her foremost virtue being that she does not traffic in innuendo before breakfast. He crossed to Evelyn, taking her hand and raising it briefly to his lips, a gesture so unexpected that she nearly started from her chair. "Good morning, Duchess. I trust you slept well." "Exceedingly well, Your Grace," she responded, catching the subtle warmth in his gaze that belied his formal address. "Excellent." He seated himself beside her, rather than at the table's head, another departure from protocol that caused Duchess Maidra's lips to tighten. "I must apologize for failing to mention tonight's assembly. Estate matters demanded immediate attention this morning. Lady Valehaven and Sir Halric have already departed," Duchess Maidra observed with calculated casualness. "Most precipitously. One wonders at such haste, especially given Seraphine's long-standing attachment to Thornridge." "Their welcome expired," the Duke replied, his tone brooking no further discussion, "as might others should they forget their place in this household." The warning, though delivered with perfect civility, silenced Duchess Maidra more effectively than an outburst might have done. She excused herself shortly thereafter, citing the need to supervise floral arrangements for the evening's festivities. When they were alone, save for the discreet footman refreshing their tea, the Duke leaned closer to Evelyn. "My aunt forgets that while she has managed Thornridge these many years, her authority exists at my pleasure." His voice remained low enough that only she could hear. "As does her residence here. She seems determined to remind me of my unexpected elevation," Evelyn observed, matching his hushed tone. "Maidra invested considerable effort grooming more suitable candidates for my consideration," he explained with a sardonic twist of his lips. "Her disappointment manifests as discourtesy. Lady Valehaven being chief among those candidates?" "Indeed." He sipped his tea thoughtfully, though never a serious contender, despite her delusions to the contrary. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only when Evelyn gathered courage to address their midnight meeting. "About last night," the Duke raised a hand, glancing meaningfully toward the footman. "Perhaps we might continue our conversation in more private surroundings. The morning room overlooks the East Gardens quite pleasantly at this hour." The morning room proved a charming chamber of golden oak and sunshine, its tall windows indeed framing the gardens where they had walked by moonlight. The glass pavilion glittered in the distance, transformed by daylight into a commonplace conservatory, rather than the realm of midnight confidences it had seemed. "You wished to speak of last night," the Duke prompted, closing the door behind them. Evelyn moved to the window, gathering her thoughts. "I found something curious upon my return." She withdrew the small silver key from her pocket. "This appeared on my bedside table, though I am certain it was not there before." He approached, his expression revealing nothing as he examined the key in her palm. "And do you know what lock it might open? I thought perhaps you might enlighten me." Their gazes held, a silent challenge passing between them. Finally he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his severe features with unexpected charm. "It opens a door in the library," he said, "a private study where I keep certain personal effects, including more of the scribblings that so interested you." Evelyn closed her fingers around the key, its metal warm against her skin. "You're entrusting me with access to your private sanctuary. I find myself," he hesitated, choosing his words with obvious care, "inclined toward transparency with you, Duchess, an unfamiliar but not unwelcome inclination." Before she could respond, a discreet knock interrupted them. Alara entered, her expression troubled. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace," she addressed them both, the title still awkward upon her tongue when directed at her childhood friend. "But a matter requires the Duchess's immediate attention." "What matter?" Evelyn asked, alarmed by Alara's evident distress. "A letter has arrived from your father, and—" She glanced uneasily at the Duke. "Lady Valehaven has been seen in Wellingford, in close conversation with Viscount Leclerc." The Duke's expression hardened. "Leclerc, I might have known." He turned to Evelyn. his voice resuming its customary precision. "Viscount Audrin Leclerc is a political rival with ambitions that frequently conflict with my interests. His alliance with Seraphine suggests mischief aimed at us both. What possible interest could my father hold for either of them?" Evelyn asked, genuinely bewildered. "Let us examine his letter," the Duke suggested. "It may provide illumination." Lord Ashcroft's missive proved brief but alarming. "My dearest daughter, I write in haste and considerable distress. A lady of striking beauty and a gentleman of obvious breeding visited Ashcroft Manor this morning, bearing documents they claim invalidate your marriage to the Duke. They spoke of certain irregularities in the marriage license, of witnesses improperly registered, of consent improperly obtained. They intimated that should I join their petition to the Archbishop, the marriage might be annulled without scandal attaching to your name. In return, they offer a settlement that would restore our family's fortune without the necessity of your continued sacrifice. I have made no commitment, but promise to consider their proposal. I implore you, if you suffer under the Duke's roof, to send word immediately. No father could bear his daughter's unhappiness, even at the cost of financial ruin. With deepest concern, your loving father Evelyn looked up from the letter to find the Duke watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. They seek to annul our marriage," she said, stating the obvious as her mind raced to comprehend the implications. "So it would appear." His voice remained calm, though she detected a dangerous undercurrent. "The question becomes, what do you wish to do about it?" The directness of his query startled her. "You ask my preference? It seems only appropriate, as the dissolution of our union would affect you most directly." He moved to the fireplace, his back to her as he added with careful neutrality, "Should you wish to return to your former life, I would not prevent it. Financial provision would be made for your family regardless." Evelyn studied his rigid posture, the tension evident in his shoulders beneath the perfect tailoring of his coat. In that moment of vulnerability, she made her decision. "I have no desire to dissolve our marriage," she said firmly. "Whatever scheme Lady Valehaven and Viscount Leclerc have concocted serves their interests, not mine." She approached him, deliberately placing herself within his line of sight. "Unless, of course, you seek freedom from our arrangement." Their gazes locked, and Evelyn glimpsed something unexpectedly fierce in his eyes. Possession, certainly, but perhaps also relief. "I do not," he stated simply. "Then we are agreed. But we must respond decisively to this challenge," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. "Viscount Leclerc has powerful connections within the ecclesiastical courts. If he succeeds in persuading your father to join his petition, we may face genuine legal entanglements. Then we must ensure my father remains unpersuaded." Evelyn considered for a moment. "A letter might be easily dismissed or intercepted. I should visit Ashcroft Manor personally." "Out of the question," the Duke replied immediately. "You would be unprotected, vulnerable to whatever machinations Leclerc and Seraphine have prepared. Then accompany me," she suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. "Let my father witness for himself the nature of our arrangement." A hint of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "An elegant solution, Duchess. We shall depart immediately after breakfast." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Tonight's assembly must proceed regardless. We shall return in time to present ourselves as a united force against whatever rumors Seraphine has already set in motion." Alara, who had remained discreetly silent throughout their exchange, now stepped forward. "What shall I tell the Duchess Mydra regarding your absence?" "Nothing," the Duke replied with cool authority. "My aunt need not be informed of our every movement. Simply state that we are attending to personal matters and will return before sunset." As he departed to make arrangements for their journey, Alara turned to Evelyn with wide eyes. "Well, I had not expected such swift alliance between you and His Grace. One might almost believe genuine affection exists beneath this marriage of convenience." Evelyn touched the silver key in her pocket, warm from proximity to her skin. "One might believe many things, Alara. The truth often proves more complicated than appearance suggests." The journey to Ashcroft Manor passed in contemplative silence, the countryside rolling past the carriage windows like scenes from a life already receding into memory. Seated opposite the Duke, Evelyn found herself studying the strong planes of his face, the subtle signs of character revealed in repose, the slight furrow between his brows that spoke of habitual concentration, the firm set of his mouth that could transform so unexpectedly into rare but transformative smiles. "How you scrutinize me most thoroughly, Duchess," he observed without opening his eyes, startling her from her reverie. "Forgive me. I was merely—" She hesitated, then decided upon honesty. "I was considering how little I truly know of you, despite our married state." He regarded her thoughtfully. "What would you know?" "Everything," she answered simply. But perhaps we might begin with why Viscount Leclerc bears you such evident ill will. A shadow crossed his features. Leclerc and I have a history spanning many years and several incidents, the most relevant being his attempt to force the sale of lands adjoining his estate, lands belonging to a certain Baron Ashcroft. Evelyn's eyes widened. My father's property. Indeed, Leclerc has coveted the eastern parcel of your family's land for years. It contains a water source his estate desperately requires. When your father's financial difficulties became known, Leclerc moved to acquire it at a fraction of its value. But you prevented this, she guessed, pieces falling into place with sudden clarity. I outbid him, the Duke confirmed, then negotiated terms with your father that allowed him to maintain ownership while satisfying his most pressing creditors. Why would you assist a stranger in such a manner? His gaze, when it met hers, held an intensity that made her breath catch. Your father was no stranger to me, Evelyn, though he had no recollection of our prior meeting. Before she could press for further explanation, the carriage slowed. Outside the window appeared the familiar gates of Ashcroft Manor, once imposing, now showing signs of neglect in flaking paint and untended gardens. Home, Evelyn thought, yet already less familiar than the man seated across from her. Lord Berengar Ashcroft received them in the faded grandeur of a drawing-room that had seen no redecoration in 20 years. His surprise at the Duke's presence alongside his daughter was poorly concealed beneath hasty courtesy. Your Grace, he stammered, bowing deeply. This is an unexpected honor. Is it? The Duke's tone remained pleasant, though his gaze swept the room with analytical precision. I should think a father might expect his daughter's husband to accompany her on such a visit. Of course, of course. Lord Ashcroft gestured nervously toward chairs that had once been elegant, but now showed signs of wear. Please be seated. Might I offer refreshment? Tea, perhaps? We require nothing but your attention, sir, the Duke stated, remaining standing. My wife has informed me of certain visitors you entertained yesterday, visitors who presented claims regarding our marriage that require immediate correction. Lord Ashcroft paled visibly. I meant no offense, Your Grace. They were most persuasive in their arguments, and naturally I have concerns for my daughter's welfare. Father, Evelyn interrupted gently, moving to take his trembling hands in hers, you must not believe whatever insinuations Lady Valehaven made regarding my situation. The Duke has been... She paused, searching for words that would convey truth without revealing too much of their private understanding. Most considerate of my comfort and happiness. Then you do not wish to pursue annulment? Her father searched her face with genuine concern. The lady suggested you might be under duress, unable to speak freely. I speak with complete freedom, Evelyn assured him firmly. Our marriage stands valid in both law and my personal choice. I would not have it dissolved. The Duke moved to stand beside her, his hand settling at the small of her back with proprietary care. Nor would I, sir. Your daughter brings grace and dignity to Thornridge that it has long lacked. I find myself most satisfied with our union. Lord Ashcroft's relief was palpable. Well, I am delighted to hear it. Most delighted indeed. He brightened considerably. I shall inform Lady Valehaven and the Viscount when next they call that their concerns were misplaced. They have arranged to return? The Duke inquired sharply. This afternoon, Lord Ashcroft confirmed, oblivious to the sudden tension in his son-in-law's bearing. They were most insistent upon receiving my answer today. The Duke checked his timepiece. How fortuitous. We shall await them here. 3 hours later, the elegant carriage of Viscount Audrin Leclerc rolled up the drive of Ashcroft Manor. Lady Seraphine Valehaven descended first, her copper hair gleaming in the afternoon sunshine, her emerald gown a deliberate echo of her previous day's attire. The Viscount followed, a slender man of perhaps 40 years, his fox-like features arranged in an expression of benevolent concern, entirely at odds with the cold calculation in his eyes. They were admitted to the drawing-room by Ashcroft Manor's elderly butler, whose announcement died on his lips at the tableau before him. For there, arranged with theatrical precision, sat the Duke and Duchess of Winthrop, flanking Lord Ashcroft in a portrait of familial harmony. The Duke had removed his coat and sat in shirt-sleeves, a brandy glass in his hand, the picture of a man at ease in his father-in-law's home. Evelyn leaned slightly toward him, her hand resting on his forearm with casual intimacy. Lady Valehaven, Viscount Leclerc. The Duke's greeting carried the chill of a midwinter frost. What an unexpected pleasure. Seraphine recovered first, her painted smile barely faltering. Your Grace, we had no idea you would honor Ashcroft Manor with your presence today. Did you not? The Duke's expression remained pleasant, though his eyes held the predatory focus of a hawk sighting prey. How curious. I was under the impression you had specific expectations regarding this household today. Viscount Leclerc stepped forward, his thin lips curved in a diplomat's practiced smile. "A simple courtesy call, Your Grace. Having heard of Lord Ashcroft's recent difficulties, we thought to offer our support." "How extraordinarily thoughtful," the Duke replied, his voice smooth as velvet over steel. "Particularly given your previous attempts to acquire his lands at ruinous prices." Colour drained from the Viscount's face. "A misunderstanding, I assure you." "Is it similarly a misunderstanding that you have represented to Lord Ashcroft that our marriage might be invalidated through ecclesiastical petition?" The Duke rose slowly, his height and bearing suddenly imposing, despite the informal setting. "Or that you have offered financial inducement for his participation in such an endeavour?" Lady Valehaven's eyes narrowed like a cornered cat's. "Merely concern for Lady Evelyn's welfare, Your Grace, given the hasty nature of your nuptials." "My welfare requires no external concern," Evelyn stated clearly, rising to stand beside her husband, "particularly not from those who would use me as a pawn in their schemes against the Duke." "I believe," the Duke said with deadly quietness, "that your business here is concluded. I would not recommend pursuing this matter further, Leclerc. The consequences would prove regrettable." The threat, though delivered without overt menace, hung in the air like thunder before lightning's strike. Viscount Leclerc, his composure cracking, executed a stiff bow. "As you wish, Your Grace. We shall trouble Lord Ashcroft no further." He turned to depart, but Lady Valehaven remained rooted in place, her emerald eyes fixed on Evelyn with naked hatred. "You think yourself victorious, country mouse," she hissed, abandoning pretense. "Enjoy your triumph while it lasts. The Duke tires quickly of simple pleasures. When he seeks more sophisticated diversions, you will find yourself as discarded as last season's fashions." The Duke moved with startling swiftness, interposing himself between Seraphine and Evelyn. "You forget yourself, madam," he said, his voice so low it scarcely carried beyond her hearing. "Remove yourself from my presence before I forget the courtesies due your sex." Something in his expression must have conveyed deadly seriousness, for Lady Valehaven paled beneath her rouge. With a final venomous glance at Evelyn, she swept from the room, her emerald skirts hissing across the worn carpet like serpents in retreat. When the sound of carriage wheels had faded down the drive, Lord Ashcroft collapsed into his chair with a gusty sigh. "Good heavens, I had no idea the depth of their machinations. To think I nearly—" "All is well, father," Evelyn assured him, though her heart still raced from the confrontation. "Their scheme is thwarted. For now," the Duke amended grimly. "Leclerc is not a man to abandon pursuit easily, nor Seraphine a woman to forgive perceived humiliation." He checked his timepiece once more. "We must return to Thornridge. Tonight's assembly provides opportunity to present a united front against whatever rumours they have already set in motion." As they prepared to depart, Lord Ashcroft drew Evelyn aside for a private word. "Are you truly content, my dear? I would not have you sacrifice happiness for financial security." She considered her answer carefully. "I am discovering contentment where I least expected it, father. The Duke is not what Wellingford whispers claim." "No," her father agreed thoughtfully, watching as the Duke conversed with their coachman in the drive. "I believe I glimpsed today the man behind the fearsome reputation, a formidable man still, but perhaps not entirely ruthless." Evelyn touched the silver key in her pocket. "Perhaps not entirely," she agreed softly. As their carriage rolled away from Ashcroft Manor, the Duke broke their companionable silence with an unexpected observation. "You performed admirably today, Duchess. Few women could have maintained such composure in the face of Seraphine's venom. Few women have spent their lives preparing to navigate society's treacherous waters with insufficient resources," she replied wryly. "One develops certain resilience." His laugh, genuine and unreserved, startled her with its warmth. "Indeed, I begin to think my choice of Duchess was more fortuitous than I realized." The afternoon sun slanted through the carriage windows, gilding his profile as he turned to gaze at the passing landscape. Evelyn found herself studying the strong line of his jaw, the subtle softening around his eyes when he laughed, the elegant hands that had penned such unexpectedly moving poetry. "Tonight," he said, still looking outward, "you will face the assembled gentry as Duchess of Winthorpe for the first time. There will be speculation, judgment, envy and malice disguised as concern." He turned to meet her gaze directly. "Are you prepared for such scrutiny?" Evelyn squared her shoulders. "I believe I am, particularly with your Grace beside me." "Calum," he corrected gently. "In private, always Calum." As Thornridge Hall appeared on the horizon, its Gothic spires gilded by the setting sun, Evelyn felt a curious sensation. Not the dread she might have expected, but something warmer, more hopeful. Not quite belonging, but perhaps its beginning. The assembly awaited with all its potential for triumph or disaster. But first, there was the silver key burning in her pocket, and the promise of secrets yet to be revealed. Thornridge Hall blazed with light, every window aglow with chandelier and candle flame, as carriages disgorged the cream of local society onto its gravelled forecourt. Livered footmen stood at attention, announcing each arrival with practiced formality as the county's most prominent families processed into the grand ballroom where the Duke and his new Duchess would formally receive their neighbours. In her chambers, Eveline submitted to the ministrations of a French lady's maid who had materialized that afternoon, a gift from the Duke, according to Mrs. Holloway. The woman's deft fingers arranged Eveline's silver blonde hair into an elegant coiffure adorned with sapphires that matched her eyes and complemented the Duchess's coronet that now rested upon her dressing table. "The master will be most pleased," the maid murmured in accented English as she secured the final pin. "You look every inch the Duchess." Eveline hardly recognized her reflection. The gown, another gift delivered while she was at Ashcroft Manor, transformed her slim figure into something regal and imposing. Midnight blue silk whispered against her skin, its bodice embroidered with silver thread that caught the light with every breath. The neckline, cut lower than anything she had worn before, displayed her mother's silver feather pendant to perfect advantage. "It's time, Your Grace," Alara announced from the doorway, her own appearance similarly enhanced for the evening's festivities. "His Grace awaits you at the bottom of the grand staircase." Eveline's fingers tightened around the silver key she had kept with her throughout the day. "One moment," she said, making a sudden decision. "There is something I must do before joining the assembly." Despite Alara's protests about timing and protocol, Eveline made her way not toward the grand staircase, but to the library, where her marriage contract had been signed. The corridors stood deserted, all staff engaged with the arriving guests, allowing her to slip inside unobserved. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating the massive desk where the Duke conducted estate business. Eveline moved not toward it, but to a small door partially concealed behind a tapestry depicting the hunt. The silver key slid into its lock with perfect precision, turning silently to grant her access to the Duke's most private sanctuary. The room beyond was smaller than she had imagined, intimate rather than imposing, its walls lined with books quite different from the legal and agricultural tomes that dominated the main library. Poetry, philosophy, volumes of artistic plates and architectural studies, these formed the Duke's personal collection, illuminating a mind far more cultured than his public persona suggested. A writing desk occupied one corner, its surface arranged with meticulous neatness, quills aligned precisely, inkwell positioned for a right-handed writer, and most significantly, a leather-bound journal identical to the poetry volume Father Corvin had given her. Eveline hesitated only briefly before opening it to the most recent entry. The familiar, elegant script filled half a page, the ink still fresh enough to suggest recent composition. She moves through Thornridge like light through stained glass, transforming what she touches, revealing colors long forgotten. I watch her fingers trace the spines of books, the embroidery on cushions I never noticed, the carved banister polished by generations of Dravenheart hands, and I wonder, when she touches me at last, what long-dormant hues might she illuminate? I have built walls of ice and reputation, cultivated fear as my companion, and power as my mistress. Yet one pair of grey-green eyes sees through these fortifications as though they were gossamer. One voice speaks my name, Calum, not Duke nor Master nor Your Grace, and something forgotten stirs beneath the permafrost of calculated existence. Tonight, she faces society as my Duchess. They will whisper, speculate, dissect her every gesture for signs of weakness or unsuitability. They know not that in her quiet dignity lies greater strength than in all their ancestral pretensions. They see not. Most people consider it impolite to read another's private writings without permission. The Duke's voice from the doorway froze Eveline in place. She closed the journal with trembling fingers, turning to face him with cheeks aflame. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I should not have presumed, and yet you did." He stepped into the room, magnificent in formal black evening attire, the silver raven pin at his lapel catching moonlight like a living thing. "Having given you the key, I can hardly claim surprise at its use." She straightened, gathering dignity around her like armor. "You write beautifully," she said simply. "Your words move me." Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability quickly masked by his customary reserve. "Words are merely words, Duchess. Actions carry greater significance. Do they not spring from the same wellspring?" she challenged gently. "The man who writes such verses cannot be entirely the ruthless Duke of reputation." He moved closer, close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of sandalwood that clung to his formal attire. Perhaps the ruthless Duke exists precisely because the man who writes verses must be protected. His voice dropped lower, meant for her ears alone despite their solitude. Vulnerability is a luxury I have seldom afforded myself. Yet you have shown it to me, she observed, through Father Corvin's gift, through this key, through your conduct since our marriage. An inexplicable impulse, he acknowledged, his gaze holding hers with unsettling intensity, one I find myself unable to regret, despite its potential danger. The grandfather clock in the main library chimed the hour, breaking the spell that seemed to have descended upon them. The Duke extended his arm with formal courtesy. "Our guests await, Duchess. Shall we face the assembly together?" Evelyn placed her hand upon his sleeve, feeling the solid strength beneath fine wool. "Together," she agreed. They progressed toward the grand staircase in silence, each absorbed in thoughts too delicate for articulation. Only as they reached the landing overlooking the entrance hall, where a footman waited to announce them, did the Duke pause. "You look beautiful tonight, Evelyn," he said quietly, his gaze sweeping over her with masculine appreciation that brought heat to her cheeks. "Every inch the Duchess of Winthrop. I feel rather like an imposter," she confessed, adjusting the unfamiliar weight of the Duchess's coronet upon her coiffure. "Playing a role for which I had no rehearsal." His smile, rare and transformative, briefly illuminated his severe features. "Then we shall improvise together. Follow my lead in protocol. In all else, I shall follow yours." The footman struck his staff 3 times upon the marble floor, bringing the bustling entrance hall to attentive silence. His Grace Duke Calum Dravenhart of Winthrop, and Her Grace Duchess Evelyn Morwenna Dravenhart of Winthrop. Every eye turned upward as they descended, a united front against the speculation and judgment that hummed beneath the surface of polite society. Evelyn felt rather than saw the assessment in each gaze, the evaluation of her gown, her jewels, her deportment, her worthiness to stand beside the most formidable peer in 3 counties. Duchess Maidra awaited at the bottom of the staircase, her severe black silk a silent rebuke against Evelyn's radiance. "Nephew, niece," the latter acknowledgement came reluctantly, accompanied by a cursory curtsy. "The assembly awaits your entrance to begin the evening properly." "Indeed, Aunt." The Duke's hand covered Evelyn's where it rested upon his arm, a subtle gesture of support. "We shall proceed directly." The ballroom of Thornridge Hall stretched before them in gilt and crystal splendor, its vaulted ceiling painted with scenes from classical mythology, its parquet floor polished to mirror-like perfection. Against the far wall, musicians poised with instruments ready, awaiting only the Duke's signal to begin the evening's first dance. As they entered, the assembled guests parted like the Red Sea before Moses, creating a path toward the dais where 2 ornate chairs, thrones in all but name, awaited the master and mistress of Thornridge. The Duke led Evelyn forward with measured steps, acknowledging greetings with regal nods but pausing for no individual conversation. From the corner of her eye, Evelyn caught sight of Viscount Leclerc standing among a clutch of elegant gentlemen, his fox-like features arranged in an expression of polite interest that did not reach his calculating gaze. Nearby, though pointedly not in conversation with him, stood Lady Valehaven, her copper hair elaborately dressed with emerald combs that matched her gown, the same shade she had worn to the wedding, Evelyn noted, a deliberate choice, no doubt, to remind all present of her prior connection to the Duke. Upon reaching the dais, the Duke turned to face the gathering, Evelyn's hand still upon his arm. The room fell silent in anticipation of his address. "Friends, neighbors, distinguished guests," he began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly to the farthest corners. "Thornridge welcomes you to celebrate the beginning of a new chapter in the House of Dravenhart." Polite applause rippled through the assembly, more dutiful than enthusiastic. "Some among you," the Duke continued, his gaze sweeping the gathering with deliberate assessment, "may have heard curious rumors regarding the circumstances of my marriage, speculation about hasty arrangements, financial motivations, or coercion." A collective intake of breath suggested he had touched a nerve. Evelyn felt tension radiating through the arm beneath her fingers. "Allow me to address such whispers directly." His tone hardened slightly. "The Duchess and I are indeed recently wed, having found in one another qualities that make formality and extended courtship superfluous. Those who know me understand I do nothing without thorough consideration, including the choice of my life's companion." He turned toward Evelyn, his expression softening perceptibly. "In the Duchess, I have found integrity, intelligence, and grace that complement the Dravenhart name. Any suggestion to the contrary reflects poorly not upon us, but upon those who circulate such falsehoods." The warning, though delivered with perfect civility, hung in the air like the blade of a guillotine. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, gazes dropping to avoid the Duke's penetrating stare. "Now," he concluded with a return to gracious authority, "let us commence the evening's festivities with the traditional first dance." He extended his hand to Evelyn, who placed hers within it with outward composure that belied her racing heart. The musicians, receiving their cue, began the stately measures of a minuet. "Follow my lead," the Duke murmured, as he guided her to the center of the floor. "Though I suspect you need little instruction in dancing." "My education may have lacked many refinements," she replied softly, "but dancing was deemed essential for catching a husband." His laugh, genuine if brief, startled nearby dancers as he drew her into the opening position. "Then your instructors may claim some credit for your current elevation, Duchess." They moved together with surprising harmony, his tall frame complementing her more delicate proportions as they executed the precise patterns of the formal dance. Evelyn felt the weight of observation upon them, the scrutiny of those seeking any misstep, any hint of awkwardness that might confirm her unsuitability for her new station. "You dance beautifully," the Duke observed as they circled one another, palms touching briefly before separating again. "Another unexpected quality I discover in my bride." "You sound almost pleased, Your Grace," she replied, a hint of teasing in her tone. "Calum," he corrected, his voice dropping so that only she could hear. "And yes, I find myself increasingly pleased with the bargain we have struck." The dance brought them together again, his hand at her waist, hers upon his shoulder. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath against her temple. "The assembly watches us like hawks circling prey," she murmured. "Particularly Lady Valehaven, whose gaze might incinerate my gown if she possessed such power." "Let them watch," he replied, his hand tightening slightly at her waist. "What they see is the Duke and Duchess of Winthorpe in perfect accord, presenting a united front against whatever malicious speculation they might harbor." The music drew to its conclusion, and the Duke executed a formal bow as Evelyn sank into a deep curtsy. Applause rippled through the ballroom, and as if a signal had been given, other couples moved onto the floor for the next dance. "You must circulate," the Duke advised, leading her toward the edge of the dance floor. "Speak with the county matrons. Charm the elderly gentlemen. Demonstrate your fitness as Mistress of Thornridge. I shall do the same among my peers. Divide and conquer," she suggested with a small smile. "Precisely." He raised her gloved hand briefly to his lips. "We shall reconvene for supper." Left to navigate the potentially treacherous waters of county society alone, Evelyn drew upon every lesson in deportment and conversation her limited education had provided. She moved among groups of elegantly attired ladies with a gracious smile that masked her inner trepidation, accepting congratulations and thinly veiled curiosity with equal composure. "Such a whirlwind romance, Your Grace," simpered Mrs. Harrington, wife of the local magistrate. "One can hardly keep pace with modern courtships." "The Duke is not a man to hesitate once his mind is made up," Evelyn replied smoothly, "a quality I find most admirable in a husband." "And such a substantial age difference," observed Lady Pembroke, her lorgnette trained on Evelyn like a weapon, "though I suppose youth has its advantages in certain domestic matters." Evelyn met the woman's gaze directly. "The Duke and I find our temperaments perfectly complementary, regardless of years between us. Age brings wisdom. Youth brings adaptability. Together they create balance." She moved through the assembly with increasing confidence, sensing rather than seeing the Duke's periodic observation of her progress. Occasionally their gazes would meet across the crowded room, and she would find unexpected reassurance in the subtle nod of approval he offered. It was during one such moment of silent communication that Lady Valehaven intercepted her path, emerald skirts blocking Evelyn's progress toward a group of younger ladies who had beckoned her to join them. "Your Grace," Seraphine purred, dropping into a curtsy so deep it bordered on mockery. "How magnificently you play the role of Duchess. One might almost believe you born to it, rather than elevated from obscurity through the Duke's inexplicable charity." Evelyn maintained her pleasant expression with effort. "Lady Valehaven, I trust you are enjoying the evening's festivities." "Oh, immensely." Seraphine's smile revealed perfect teeth, particularly observing how our dear Duke performs his husbandly duties with such conviction, almost as though he genuinely desired the match, rather than being maneuvered into it through your father's financial manipulations. The accusation, delivered with honeyed venom, struck closer to truth than Evelyn cared to admit, yet she found strength in the knowledge of what had passed between herself and Calum in recent days: the poetry, the midnight garden, the silver key. How fascinating, she replied with perfect composure, that you believe yourself so intimately acquainted with the Duke's motivations. I was unaware he confided his private thoughts to passing acquaintances. Colour flooded Seraphine's cheeks beneath her careful rouge. I was hardly a passing acquaintance, as you well know. Forgive me, Evelyn said with manufactured contrition. I intended no offence. The Duke speaks so rarely of his past that I sometimes forget such connections existed before our marriage. The barb struck home, evident in the tightening of Seraphine's painted mouth. Before she could formulate a suitably poisonous retort, a new voice entered their exchange. Duchess, I believe the Duke requests your presence for the announcement of supper. Father Corvin materialized at Evelyn's elbow, his rheumy eyes surprisingly alert as they assessed Lady Valehaven. Lady Seraphine, how pleasant to see you in attendance tonight. I had thought perhaps your invitation might have been overlooked. The old priest's mild tone carried a subtle edge that suggested complete awareness of recent events. Seraphine's emerald eyes narrowed momentarily before her social mask reasserted itself. Father Corvin, still serving as the Duke's conscience, I see. Though perhaps your influence wanes these days. She flicked her gaze dismissively toward Evelyn. Your Grace, do enjoy your momentary triumph. I shall observe its inevitable conclusion with great interest. She swept away in a rustle of silk, leaving behind the lingering scent of too heavy perfume. Father Corvin patted Evelyn's hand with grandfatherly affection. Pay her no mind, my dear. Jealousy distorts even the most rational minds, and Lady Valehaven was never blessed with rationality to begin with. Evelyn smiled gratefully at the elderly priest. Thank you for your timely intervention, Father, and for your previous gift, she added with meaning. It has provided most illuminating reading. The old man's eyes twinkled. I thought it might. Our Duke contains multitudes beyond his public persona, as you are discovering. Indeed, she agreed softly, though I suspect I have only begun to glimpse the man behind the title. A journey worth continuing, Father Corvin suggested, as he escorted her toward the center of the ballroom where the Duke awaited, for both your sakes. Supper proceeded with elaborate formality, the Duke and Duchess presiding over the main table, with Duchess Maidra, Viscount Leclerc, and other prominent guests arrayed according to precise order of precedence. Conversation flowed like the French champagne that filled crystal flutes with pale gold effervescence, superficially brilliant, but ultimately insubstantial. It was during the removal of the fish course that disaster struck. Herr Footman, newly hired for the occasion and evidently nervous, stumbled while reaching between Evelyn and Duchess Maidra. The silver platter he carried tilted precariously, sending a cascade of sauce across the pristine tablecloth and directly onto the sleeve of Evelyn's midnight blue gown. Gasps rippled through the assembly as conversation halted abruptly. The footman stood frozen in horror, his complexion ashen. "Clumsy fool!" Duchess Maidra hissed, rising halfway from her seat in outrage. "Remove yourself immediately!" The young man's hands shook so violently that the platter clattered against the table edge. Forgive me, Your Grace," he stammered, addressing Evelyn with naked terror. "I didn't mean—" "Silence!" Duchess Maidra commanded. "His Grace will have you dismissed without reference for such incompetence." All eyes turned to the Duke, whose expression had hardened into the implacable mask that had earned him his fearsome reputation. The footman visibly trembled, likely envisioning not merely dismissal but physical retribution. In the breathless silence, Evelyn made a decision. "No harm done," she said clearly, using her napkin to blot the worst of the sauce from her sleeve. "Accidents occur in the best regulated households. Please continue with your duties." The footman stared at her in disbelief. Duchess Maidra's thin lips compressed in disapproval, and the Duke, the ruthless Duke of Wellingford Whispers, studied his wife with an expression of quiet assessment. "You heard the Duchess," he said finally, his tone measured. "Continue with service. Mrs. Holloway, perhaps fresh napkins might be provided." Relief washed over the young footman's features as he executed a deep bow. "Thank you, Your Grace. Your Graces. Most merciful." As he retreated, Duchess Maidra leaned toward Evelyn with barely concealed irritation. "You undermine authority with such leniency, niece. The servants must learn their place through consistent discipline." "On the contrary, Aunt," Evelyn replied evenly. "True authority requires no petty displays of power. The young man will serve with greater care and loyalty for having received mercy rather than punishment." The Duke's unexpected laugh drew startled glances from nearby diners. "Well reasoned, Duchess. It seems Thornridge may benefit from your particular brand of authority." The remainder of supper passed without further incident, though Evelyn caught Viscount Leclerc observing her with speculative interest that made her uneasy. When the meal concluded, guests processed back to the ballroom for the evening's continued dancing. As the Duke led her onto the floor for a country dance that would involve changing partners, he spoke quietly in her ear. "You handled that situation with unexpected grace, Duchess. Most women of your station would have sacrificed the servant to maintain appearances." "Perhaps I do not yet fully understand my station," Evelyn replied as they separated briefly in the pattern of the dance, then came together again. "Or perhaps I understand it differently than expected." His eyes held hers with surprising warmth. "Your understanding brings refreshment to traditions grown stale with repetition." They parted again as the dance required, Evelyn finding herself temporarily partnered with Viscount Leclerc, whose fox-like features arranged themselves into a smile that never reached his calculating eyes. "Your Grace," he murmured as they circled one another, "how admirably you've adapted to your elevated circumstances. One might almost believe you born to the title rather than acquired through financial arrangement." "Your concern for my adaptation is touching, Viscount," she replied evenly, "though perhaps misplaced given your earlier attempts to dissolve my marriage." His smile tightened. "A misunderstanding, I assure you. I sought only to offer alternatives should your situation prove uncomfortable." "My situation suits me perfectly," Evelyn stated firmly as the dance carried her back toward the Duke, as I believe was demonstrated at Ashcroft Manor today. The remainder of the assembly passed in a whirl of dances, conversations, and the elaborate social rituals that structured aristocratic gatherings. Throughout, Evelyn felt the Duke's attention like a tangible presence, his gaze finding her across crowded spaces, his hand occasionally brushing hers as they moved among their guests with choreographed precision. It was well past midnight when the last carriage departed down Thornridge's lamplit drive. Duchess Mydra had retired an hour earlier, pleading fatigue, leaving the Duke and his new bride to bid farewell to lingering guests. "You have triumphed tonight, Duchess," the Duke observed as the final carriage disappeared into the darkness. They stood together on the entrance steps, the night air cool against skin warmed by dancing and conversation. "Society has taken your measure and found nothing wanting." "Society's approval concerns me less than yours," Evelyn admitted, emboldened by the night's successes and perhaps by the single glass of champagne she had permitted herself. "Have I met your expectations as Duchess of Winthorpe?" He turned to face her fully, moonlight silvering his severe features into something almost otherworldly in its masculine beauty. "You have exceeded them in every particular. Your grace under Seraphine's attacks, your composure during the incident at supper, your charm with even the most difficult guests, all confirm the wisdom of my choice." "Your choice?" She raised an eyebrow. "I recall circumstances rather than choice dictated our arrangement. Perhaps initially," he acknowledged, "yet I find myself increasingly grateful for whatever confluence of events brought you to Thornridge." The admission, delivered with uncharacteristic openness, stirred something warm in Evelyn's chest. Before she could respond, the Duke gestured toward the open doorway. "It grows late. I shall escort you to your chambers." They progressed through the silent house, servants having been dismissed to their beds after the evening's labors. Only moonlight illuminated their path, casting elongated shadows across marble floors and up paneled walls. At the door to the east wing, the Duke paused. "Tomorrow, should you wish it, I thought we might ride out to view the estate. As Duchess, you should become familiar with Thornridge's full extent." "I would like that very much," Evelyn replied, "though I warn you, my horsemanship may not match my dancing." His smile, rare but transformative, briefly illuminated his features. "Then we shall proceed at whatever pace suits your comfort." He hesitated, then added with careful neutrality, "I find myself increasingly concerned with your comfort, Evelyn." The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither yet dared articulate. Evelyn felt her heart quicken beneath her damaged gown. "Good night, Calum," she said softly, his given name still unfamiliar but increasingly precious upon her tongue. He took her hand, raising it to his lips with courtly grace. But instead of the formal kiss protocol demanded, he turned her palm upward and pressed his lips to its sensitive center, a gesture of startling intimacy that sent heat coursing through her veins. "Good night, Duchess," he murmured against her skin. "Dream well." As Evelyn closed her chamber door behind her, fingers still tingling from his touch, she realized with sudden clarity that the most ruthless duke in England had begun to thaw, and in that thawing lay both promise and peril for her increasingly vulnerable heart. Epilogue. 6 months after the midnight assembly that had established Evelyn as Duchess of Winthorpe in county society, autumn painted Thornridge's vast gardens in gold and crimson splendor. From her favorite bench in the glass pavilion, now filled with late-blooming chrysanthemums at her direction, Evelyn observed the seasonal transformation with contented appreciation. Much had changed since that spring evening when she had proven herself equal to the challenges of her position. Duchess Maidra had departed for the continent, ostensibly for her health, but in reality because Thornridge now unquestionably belonged to its new mistress. Viscount Leclerc had withdrawn his opposition to the Duke's interests after certain financial manipulations had been exposed through anonymous letters to his creditors. Lady Valehaven had married an elderly baron and removed to his Scottish estate, her defeat in the battle for the Duke's attention finally accepted if not gracefully conceded. And Calum, no longer merely the Duke in her thoughts or conversation, had gradually revealed the man behind the fearsome reputation. The ruthlessness remained in business and politics, but within Thornridge's walls he showed increasing warmth, consideration, and even occasional flashes of humour that transformed his severe features into genuine handsomeness. Their marriage, begun as mere contract, had evolved into partnership. Evelyn now managed Thornridge's considerable household with quiet efficiency, instituted charitable initiatives that improved relations with tenant farmers, and even accompanied Calum to London, where she had navigated the treacherous waters of the season with surprising success. Yet despite growing companionship and evident mutual respect, one boundary remained uncrossed. Each night, Evelyn retired to her chambers in the East Wing, while Calum occupied the ducal suite across the house. The intimacy implied in marriage existed only in increasingly charged glances, brief touches, and conversations that deepened with each passing week. The sound of approaching footsteps drew Evelyn from her reverie. Calum entered the pavilion, autumn sunlight gilding his tall figure as he moved to join her on the bench. "I thought I might find you here," he said, his deep voice holding the warmth it now reserved exclusively for her. "You seemed preoccupied at breakfast." "I was remembering," she admitted, adjusting her shawl against the October breeze. "It seems impossible that only half a year has passed since I stood in Wellingford Market, humiliated and afraid." His expression softened as he reached for her hand, a gesture that had become comfortably familiar between them. "Much has changed." "Indeed." She turned to face him fully. "Yet one thing remains unaltered. We live as strangers beneath the same roof, Calum." The directness of her statement clearly startled him. His fingers tightened around hers. "Not strangers, surely. Friends, at least. Partners in many ways. But not in all ways," she said softly, summoning courage for words too long unspoken. "Not as husband and wife, in truth." Colour touched his cheekbones, but he did not look away from her steady gaze. "I wished to give you time, to ensure you did not feel obligated by our arrangement." "And if I no longer wish for time?" she asked, heart racing beneath her autumn weight gown. "If obligation has transformed to desire?" For answer, he reached into his coat and withdrew a familiar object, the small volume of poetry Father Corvin had given her on their wedding night. "I have written something new," he said, opening it to a ribbon-marked page. "Words I could not speak, but perhaps might read to the one who inspired them." The verses, composed in his elegant hand, spoke of ice transformed to flowing water, of walls crumbling beneath gentle persistence, of a heart long frozen learning to beat with renewed purpose. The final lines, underlined with a single precise stroke, caused Evelyn's breath to catch. "If I could speak what verse conceals imperfectly, 3 words would bridge the gulf between our separate souls. 3 words I offer now, not writ, but spoken true. I love you, Evelyn. I love you whole." She raised her eyes to find his watching her with vulnerable intensity, the fearsome Duke nowhere visible in his unguarded expression. "You need not respond in kind," he said quietly. "I wish only that you know the truth of what has grown within me these months past." For answer, Evelyn placed her hand against his cheek, her thumb tracing the curve of his lower lip with gentle wonder. The ruthless Duke of legend would never speak such words. "The ruthless Duke exists only beyond Thornridge now," he admitted. "Within these walls with you I am merely Calum, a man discovering feelings he thought forever beyond his reach." As golden leaves spiraled down around their glass sanctuary, Evelyn leaned forward to place her lips against his, their first true kiss offered freely, rather than as obligation or protocol. His response, tentative at first, then warming with evident longing, sealed a transformation more binding than any marriage contract. That night, the Duchess's chambers in the East Wing stood empty, and though servants whispered and smiled behind discreet hands, none would have dared suggest that the ruthless Duke had been anything but conquered by his unexpected bride. For in the end, the most implacable heart had yielded not to beauty or station or wealth, but to something far more profound, the courage of a woman who saw beyond reputation to the poetry beneath.